Welcome to Laguna Podcast, an attempt to illustrate the lives and stories from the Texas outdoors. Today I sit down with a man who is one of the most passionate speckled trout anglers I have had the chance of speaking to, creating a brand out of necessity for a product to withstand the Texas salt. This is my conversation with Darren Jones.
You know, on things that are highly opinionated, where like you have one opinion or the other. I mean, you can. I'm an open book, man. You can ask me what.
I don't want you to feel at all like you're dancing around eggshells. I want you just to be yourself. Like this conversation we've had today already, I think that would have been plenty.
Yeah.
Okay, you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. I got Mr. Feral Concepts here, Darren Jones. And just to basically get it running before you even do your introduction, I always start this with the same question, which is run me through. And I think this will be interesting because you're someone who is quite literally, from what I can tell, addicted to this stuff. Just like I would like to hope that many of us are. But with that being said, I want you to start with your first memory in the outdoors and your chronological progression as an outdoorsman. Just in general, from shooting, fishing, whatever. Just give me your story up until maybe you're 18 or whenever you started, becoming an adult, and then we'll get into the feral stuff and how that became a thing and just move that way.
I'm not an adult now. I'm an overgrown child, but well, I was born and raised in Corpus. So if you're a kid in Corpus, my parents are both school teachers, and on the weekends, we ran the beach. I'd go crabbing with my mom. We didn't get a boat till much later, so we walked in and waded everywhere, even when I was a little kid. Mm-hmm. And one of my first real memories, as far as, we were always hunting or fishing. Me and my dad, and my mom, she would go a lot too. Mm-hmm. But it's mostly me and my dad. And my first real memory of catching a big trout, where I was like, okay, this is what it's all about. There's a place called Indian Point Pier, mm-hmm. which is over the Long Bridge going towards Portland. You cross over the Harbor Bridge in Corpus like you're going to Portland, and you cross the Long Trestle Bridge, and then on the right, on the Corpus Christi Bay side, is a place called Indian Point Pier. Well, back then, this is the early 80s, and Hurricane Allen had come through and wrecked a lot of stuff in Corpus in the 80s. Mm-hmm. And Indian Point Pier was no exception. It got trashed. So it was just basically overgrown. You had to have four-wheel drive to just drive up to it, because the roads were left in disrepair.
Unkept,
yeah, I mean, everything got really torn up. And it was December. My dad had picked me up from school. And
how old were you?
Let's see. I was in 5th grade, so I was like 10. 11, 12, somewhere in there. So this is like 82. So it was a couple of years after the hurricane.
Oh, but right before the freeze. Okay, this is cool.
Yeah, right before the freeze. We'll get into that. So Dad picked me up from school, and we went over, drove across the bridge, drove in there. We had a Toyota Land Cruiser, so there's nowhere we couldn't go. The old FJ, and with the palm tree leaf roof, because the old roof rusted and peeled off on SPID one night when my dad was driving home late. But that's a whole nother story in itself. It did have palm tree leaf roof. He had a rack made, and we put palm tree leaves on it and paraffined it down. And yeah, it was pretty ghetto, but that's what he had.
It worked. Lifestyle.
So it worked, but he was kind of iconic there, driving around Corpus there for a little while in the early 80s. But so we get out. We didn't have kayaks back then. That's before rotomolded kayaks became a thing. Those big white pool, it looks like a pool noodle, but they're big. They're probably 8 to 10 inches in diameter. Mm-hmm. And a friend of ours named Bud Frey, who was one of my dad's dear friends down in Corpus that we fished with a lot, probably one of the best fishermen I've ever known in my life. Mm-hmm. And me, him, and Bud, these things, they lashed them together and put a piece of plywood across the top, so it looked like a catamaran, like a raft.
Okay, yes, okay.
And you sat on that, and you wore swim fins, and you kicked out so you could fish those deeper guts towards the end of the pier.
No kidding.
Wearing a life jacket, all that stuff, but it was cold. It was December, usually after the first front. And we were throwing the old style mirror lures, the 5M28s, the 3 hookers, throwing those plugs.
I saw Mike Williams write a story about that recently on Facebook. When he was like part of that process, that prototyping process. Yeah. I don't want to take away from the story.
No, that's great, because that lure, back then, and it's still a good lure. You just don't see them hard. People just don't use them as much. But
This episode is made possible by our friends over at Gordy & Sons Outfitters, located in Houston, Texas, and employing a team of experienced outdoorsmen specializing in fly fishing, hunting, and wing shooting. Gordy & Sons is sure to prepare you for success in the outdoors. Next time you find yourself prepping for a weekend getaway or a bucket list trip, be sure to give them a shout.
in that kind of deeper water, fishing over those deep guts and deeper oyster reefs and stuff, that was the lure. And I remember it was a pink and silver one, and I think I've got it out there on my lure rack when you were out in the shop looking
Still
around.
the same one, that one you caught that fish on?
Yeah.
That's really cool.
I don't know if it's that one, but it's one just like it.
Okay.
I don't know if that one ever, that one might have got broke off or whatever, because I broke off a lot of stuff throwing around those pier pilings. But I remember I caught a trout that was probably 25, 26 inches before, for a 12-year-old kid with his dad, and you're doing it yourself. By the time I was like 9 or 10, as soon as you could take your own fish off and deal with your own problems,
You're running solo.
my dad was like, okay, you can go with the boys now. You can go with the men now, because they don't want to listen to some, don't want to be babysitting some kid when they're out there trying to catch fish. And I remember I caught that fish and, wrestled him onto that raft without falling off, which was, dude, I look back and I'm like, my God, he goes, and he would tell me a lot of times, he goes, man, if your mother ever sees this, she'll kill me,
So genius too.
But it worked, and it was super cheap, and it fit in the back of a pickup truck. So you could load 3 or 4 in the back of a truck.
Yeah, just layer them like pallets. It's crazy.
We just tied them down and drove out there, and walk out into the water, put your fins on over your wading booties, and just paddle right out.
Oh, cool, man.
And it worked. It worked. And we still, even then, I mean, in the summertime when we wanted to eat fish, we go and catch a limit. But even then, when we were fishing the point, every now and then we keep a few fish, but we were mostly catching bigger trout. I saw my dad catch some damn good trout right there back in the day, and some big flounder.
I can imagine.
Now, flounder, as you know, they hardly get a break. Poor flounder. But, we caught a lot of fish, and we didn't keep a lot when we fished there. And I always asked my dad, Dad, why don't we keep them? He goes, no, these are big trout, man. You don't keep these big trout. We'll keep them little ones.
What an interesting mindset to have even back then, man.
Yeah. He was like, let these big ones go. Well, he grew up bass fishing.
Oh, so he was just used to letting the big ones go anyways.
He's just, he grew up in East Texas and grew up bass fishing in the 50s and 60s. And he goes, if we kept bass, they were 14 inches, the game, sometimes these private lakes and even some other lakes were like, keep fish.
Yeah.
We got too many of them, keep fish. So, we ate bass back in the day. And, but he'd be like, now we're letting these big fish go. He goes, we'll go string some up, we'll go fish the well pads in the summer and load up on fish if we want to get fish. But, that was, even back then, that was his mentality. But that was the first real, as far as memories that stick out, that was one of the ones that one really stuck out in my mind, because that was my first, quote unquote, big trout.
Yeah. And this might sound silly, like a silly question to ask, but do you remember how you felt or what you thought, like word for word, in that moment when you boated that 25, 26? The reason I ask is because, I think that as we get older, from those younger years, there are very few moments that are, this might sound wrong, but sobering, where you kind of everything, as being the kid right now, the drama, everything falls and you're like, whoa, like this is something that I have a passion, something I have a calling to do. That's why I asked if maybe that's something that went through your head.
And it is, and I do have it, I don't know about word for word, but I just remember when I caught that big fish. And, we were catching fish that day. Everybody was catching fish, and I caught that good fish and brought it in. I was, you get the pat on your back from my dad's buddies that were there fishing with us.
And everyone's cheering for you.
Everybody's like, hey, good job, bud. Slap you on the back. You did a good job, and I see that hunting. I like to take kids turkey hunting and deer hunting and fishing and all that kind of stuff. My own kids, as well as, first timers. And you can see a kid grow, like when a kid shoots his first deer.
Almost like a rite of passage.
Yeah, it is a rite of passage. And that was a rite of passage for me, because I'd finally been accepted. I've been brought into the group, that's Jones's kid,
And now he was, that's a fishing partner.
Like this kid can fish, he can hang. And I never complained, no matter how wet or cold or whatever I was, because I know if I complained,
you're not going anymore.
I might not be able to go anymore. Because that was my dad was kind of hard, in that respect. He was like, hey, look, nobody wants to hear the opinions of a 12-year-old. All right. Nobody cares. act right, yes or no, sir.
Act like you belong. Yeah,
he was big on manners too. He's like, it's yes or no, sir. I hear you say yeah to one of these men. Some of these guys are fought in Korean War, and I mean, they were badasses. And it's like, dude, he's like, do not disrespect these men. And that's just the way I was brought up. And my dad, I miss him and love him to death, but he was an old coach, and he'd come upside your head, and then tell you that he loved you right after. Like, I love you, son, but I'm not going to let you act like that. Yeah. And that's the way my dad was. But he was, you could see, and he grew too. You could see, because he was like, okay, kid, I've taught him something at least, but yeah, it was getting brought into the fold with the men, the rite of passage thing that I think was where everything kind of came together on that part of it, because I was accepted by the tribe.
Yeah, bingo. Yeah. And so then I can only imagine those years after, those formative years, well, as an angler, not as a child, but as an angler, were quite interesting as well, moving forward from that 25, 26, right?
So you say 25, 26.
25, 26, that fish. So you
yeah. It's 25.
This rite of passage now, like you're starting to feel like you're part of a group of guys, and you start maybe even trying harder, taking it to maybe putting more effort into it, or something along those lines, or just like evolving as an angler, better way to put it.
Well, that's when I started paying attention to what my dad and those guys were doing. Because, when you sit there getting your ass kicked by the men several times, it's kind of like, what am I doing wrong? Like I'm just, I was just zoned out, just fishing, where I was like, I started watching Bud and watching my dad. And Bud's one of those guys that if he had a gold spoon, you didn't have a prayer in your life. He would absolutely embarrass, reds or trout, he'd embarrass you with a gold spoon. Really? When we go wading, he'd put like two of, those rubber looking shrimp tails, that are, the old ones. Yeah. He put like 3 of those in his pocket. Like a top water and an old pill jar, and then like 2 gold spoons. That's all he carried. Wow. And he would absolutely just like, you go back to the boat, like, I just want to quit fishing. It's like playing golf with somebody that's really good. Like, well, I've suck at this. Yeah. That's the way Bud was. And my dad was a good fisherman also. I don't give him enough credit, but he was a good fisherman and he loved it. He was super passionate about catching fish, and especially trying to catch big trout. He loved catching big trout, and he wasn't, look at some of these guys now, guys that I consider to be really good anglers, and some of them are like tournament
peers
guys
or people that you just know in the space, or
it's people I know in the space and friends. Okay. I know some guys that are not on social media, and they're just, they're just really good fishermen. And, and then some of the guys that are in the space, just pulling them out of the hat, Chris Bush with Speckled Truth.
Absolutely.
Guy is a stick. He kind of does that all shucks.
I know he did on that post, and I was like, man, shut up. It's my podcast. Like,
Chris will do that a lot, but he is, and I won't let him hide behind it. He's a damn good fisherman. He really is. He's a great guy to learn from, because he's very meticulous. And if you watch him fish, like he did it to me. We were fishing Baffin this a couple of years ago, and we were throwing jerk baits, and I'd never thrown jerk baits before. And Chris was put on these jerk baits, this one's particular kind of jerk bait. I'm trying to remember what kind it was. And he throws out there and he catches one, 24, 25. I'm like, all right. And he did it about 3 or 4 more times. And I finally got up next to him. I said, whatever you're throwing, give me one of them. Because you were thumping my ass. I was throwing corkies, plastics, soft, you name it. I was throwing it out there, and they just didn't want it. And he gave me one. I tied it on like second cast, caught a 5-pounder. I'm like, okay.
Now we're cooking with gas. Yeah.
And now I got to pay attention. We've got to go and pay attention again. And I watch these guys, how they do it. And that's why I like, one good thing about being in the business is, I get to fish with some really good fishermen, guys that are guides and just guys that are just sticks. And, they either use my gear or, they're using it in their guide business or whatever. And like some of them have got to be really close friends as well through this process. And, just watching how they do it. Everybody does it different. Like if you ever get a chance to fish with Brett Sweeney, who's, you'll see his name on the Legends leaderboard.
Consistently?
Most times, yeah. Nice. He's pretty consistent. I mean, the guy zeroed last year on one day at the Legends, and I think they ended up coming in 3rd or 4th, and he zeroed on one of the days. The guy's a badass, and he uses my gear, just bought it, And then we went on a trip and he used it, and he's just like, dude, I really like the gear. I'm going to keep using it. I'm like, fantastic. And, and he paid for his gear. Most guys do. I was trying to emulate him retrieving a corky, and he looked over at me and goes, don't try to do what I'm doing. And I was just like, because I was watching him, I was like, how he can move that rod so fast. He retrieves a corky. It looks like he is trying to hack through a wall with a freaking sledgehammer.
Really?
Just wham, 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 the way he works a corky. And I'm just like, I've got it. And he was, again, just
thumping
me. I'm like, okay, he's doing something different. And I tried to emulate it, and I couldn't quite do it, but I did it good enough where I started catching fish. I'm like, and it's basically like, okay, they want a faster retrieve, but the way he's doing it, and he is just laser focused. That dude is laser focused. That's why he's such a good tournament angler. He is one of those guys, he doesn't want to lose, and he is laser focused on what he's doing. And just like anything else, dude, if you're shooting a shotgun, at clays, or if you're shooting a basketball into a hoop, the guys that are really good are laser focused. They are laser focused on what they're doing. That's all they're thinking about.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
but we're talking again. We went from ways you were picking up different like techniques and skills, and then we talked about modern day stuff. But we're still working our way from those formative years as an angler, where you were kind of picking apart the tactics that your friends like Bud, or your dad's friends like Bud, were using, as well as your dad. Continue through that part and keep going on.
Okay, so I've got off on a tangent there.
That's what I'm here for. Yeah. But I'm glad that we're doing this. Like we're covering a lot of information.
But I started paying attention to what Dad was doing and what they were doing, and it applied to going bird hunting and scouting and all that kind of stuff. Because I was saying, as a kid, you're kind of oblivious when you're a kid. Like we just show up and like, oh wow, there's birds everywhere. And what I started figuring out is there's birds everywhere because my dad and his friend Jay went out and scouted. And they scouted. They'd get out of school. This is when we're fast forwarding to some, but we hunted a lot in the valley. Back before the valley was, super developed like it is. Like some of the places that have buildings sitting on them, I remember
hunting, like quail hunting,
dove hunting.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. But yeah.
Dove hunting and duck hunting in the valley. And I always just thought, oh, wow, we just showed up where the ducks are. And what I started figuring out later, because I went with them scouting. He's like, my dad was like, all right, here's the boring part. Well, he goes, it's not boring because we're driving around finding stuff, and BSing in the truck, and a lot of
having a good time,
a lot of good windshield time. But he goes, this is what it takes. You got to go and you got to find them. And just that progression as a kid, seeing that was like, okay, success doesn't just happen, right? With anything that we do, there is a lot of effort that's put in that people don't see, and that's one of the things is scouting, especially for ducks. Dove, food source, water, you pretty much got it, and you got to be in the flight path. With ducks, you really got to, because they could be there one day and gone the next.
You mean dove?
What's that?
We mean dove?
Ducks.
Okay, sorry. I thought we were talking about two separate things.
Well, dove are fairly easy because, you've got a food source, you've got water, something that's driving them there, and you have to be in, where they are, obviously. But with ducks, down in the valley, a lot of those areas and those fields that would flood, not all of them would have ducks on them. And you'd be like, well, why not? But one pond would be completely loaded. And I'm not a duck, so I don't know what they're thinking. I would love to know what they're thinking. But, there was just a lot of things. And that's what scouting and that preparation, going back to paying attention and learning is what made my dad and them really good. Because, I thought everybody went out and limited out every weekend. And that wasn't the case.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted you to talk about before we start moving more towards like modernity and stuff like that, you were able to witness both of the freezes, correct? 83 and 89. I want you to kind of just describe, and I know we just talked about it and we kind of briefed over it, but if you could kind of describe those freezes and what the fishing was like, how it changed. Shannon did a great job, but I would love to get your perspective on that kind of time frame.
Yeah. I was 12 years old in January of 83. I remember we were up in East Texas. That's where all my family is from originally. And we were up there for Christmas, and we got stuck up there because of the weather. And as soon as we could get on the road and get home, we got home. And I remember coming back into town and just stopping on Ocean Drive. My dad pulled over and was just looking at the bay and was like, the bay's frozen.
Mm-hmm.
And again, being a 12-year-old kid, you're like, oh, wow, that's kind of cool. He's like, no, you don't get it. Like, that doesn't happen. You know, I've been down here a long time and that's never happened. And he's like, and I could just see the worry. I remember the worry. I still remember it, the worry on his face, because he's like, this is going to kill a lot of fish, you know, because we fished every weekend. And so we went home and he called Bud and some of his other buddies, and they were like, yeah, we need to go out and check stuff out. So we went and walked where Corpus Christi A&M is now, where that bridge is right there by Corpus, where everybody parks to go and fish. We walked that shoreline back there, and there was I'm not sure what's there now, but if you go on down, what is that? Is that Nile Drive that comes into there right
I'm not
there
sure.
into PID? I'm trying to remember. It's been a while since I've been back that way. Anyway, that used to all just be open back there. It's all houses and stuff now. But you could there's a lot of places you could just walk into the Oso from there. And I think there's still a park there that you can kind of get back there, like a nature preserve or whatever. But I remember parking the truck and we walked in there, and just the amount of, it's hard to describe, you know, because the freeze we had in 21 was bad. But even looking at that, I was like, this is bad, but it's not 83 bad.
Yeah.
I mean, 83, we were talking about this earlier. Imagine big chunks of white styrofoam along the edge of the water for as far as you can see. I mean, literally as far as you can see. And that was all fish. And it was just like, and some of the fish that we were walking up on were true trophy class type trout.
I can imagine.
Just gigantic trout. And I just remember my dad being like, wow. And all his friends were just speechless. I mean, they were like, man, like just the size of the fish that were washed up, but they were just saying, man, this is we got to do something different.
Yeah.
You know?
No, Shannon Tompkins would deemed it the freeze of biblical proportions.
It was. That was a biblical freeze. And so I remember my dad, and I think you've talked to this guy before. There was a guy named Fred Blackmar and his son, Phil Blackmar.
I know Phil.
Yeah,
I was with
golfer.
him literally yesterday
Yeah.
at Trout Fest. I'm sorry.
Yeah, he's a hell of a guy. Well, Fred, his dad, built golf clubs, and my dad had Fred building golf clubs. My dad was a lefty, and Fred knew how to fit clubs and do all that kind of stuff. I mean, he was, persimmon drivers, and he'd do all of it. And I remember going over to his house, and Fred was a fisherman too. I mean, really,
I've heard, yes.
I mean, phenomenal big trout guy. And I remember being in his shop and seeing, this is a couple of years afterwards, the pre-freeze photos, Polaroids, pre-freeze pictures and post-freeze pictures. And the pre-freeze, of course, is, just a wall of big trout pics.
Yeah.
And then
Sparse.
the post-freeze is, a couple,
Wow.
Yeah. And it was just really, I mean, it had an effect on the fishing. And I think a lot of people, not a lot, but some really got conservation minded then. Be like, it's going to be different from here on out. And it was. And that's back when the limit, I think, was 20, 15 or 20.
I thought it was 25 at one point.
Yeah, at 25. I think after the 83 freeze, they went to 15 or 20.
15.
Yeah, they went to 15 after the 83 freeze.
And then they went to 10, 5, 3.
Yeah, 10, 5, 3. So in my lifetime, I'm 54. In my lifetime, it's gone from 25 to 3.
Wow.
But just think about that for a minute.
Yeah, man. That's like, 10? That's like a little over 10%. Like 90% of the limit has been removed. Which,
Yeah.
I mean, for better or for worse, I personally believe it'd be a good thing. And I think you and I both unanimously agree on that as well.
Yeah, I'm for it. I want people to be able to catch and keep fish and eat fish. And I don't have a problem with that. Hell, I keep them. I keep and eat fish. I just, I don't know. There's more people. And back then, dude, we were running we would put our boat in at Bird Island. If we were fishing like Yarborough area, we'd put it at Bird Island and we'd fish like cathead, Tide Gauge, Corrales, Yarborough. That was kind of our big loop. And we did all this in an 18-foot puller craft with a 40-horse Mercury on it. My dad swears that's how his back got messed up. Wow. Just getting the crap beat out of you making that trip. Oh God, it was all, I mean, Baffin is rough, and and you know, we could run fairly shallow on that boat, but still, you know, getting around the rocks, and there's some parts where you just got to pay the toll, and you know, you got to run through some rougher water, and you know, especially if you're running at night, you know, and didn't want to hit rocks, you ran the markers, you know, unless you really just ran that stuff all the time like the commercial fishermen did. You know, they knew how to run that stuff in the dark. We weren't those people. You know, we had to rely on Q-beam and finding markers and that kind of thing. But anyhow, so 83, it's very vivid in my mind. And, you know, and then 89, I actually wasn't living in Corpus at that time. We moved up to East Texas when I was like a sophomore in high school. And that's where I finished up high school. And then, you know, went to college and all that stuff. But so I don't remember. I remember getting the reports from our friends in the valley, you know, because they had, you know, some of them were citrus farmers, and they're like, yeah, man, we got hammered. You know, the citrus industry takes a huge hit when that kind of thing happens. And they're like, yeah, it's bad. You know, it's probably as bad as 83, if not worse, you know, in some aspects of the
they got hit right again, like a month later, a week, 2 weeks later or something?
Yeah, it was just a 1-2 punch, you know, just bad. And so we were like, well, you know, because I remember we went in 88, we went down there during the summer for a couple of weeks and just caught fish. Like, I mean, it didn't matter where you stopped. It didn't matter what you were throwing. We just caught the crap out of fish. I remember because we caught them on August 8th of 1988. I remember my dad said, we filleted some fish. My dad's like, look, 8888, it's a lucky day, you know. And I'll never forget that. That's one of those memories that you just never lose. We were at our friend's house in Laguna Vista, and he was like, hey, look, he goes, because they'd always write the date on a bag of fish, you know. And he wrote it on, he goes, oh, it's 8888. And like August 8th of 88.
8888.
A month before my 18th birthday. So, yeah, but 89 was bad. And I remember talking to other guys that talked about the 89 freeze, and they're like, yeah, it was a bad one. But, you know, I just, that seeing all those big dead fish, number one is just, you know, you're just like, oh man, you know, how are we ever going to recover from this? Well, nature will find a way if you let it, you know, if you give her a break. And, you know, we've bounced back pretty good, you know.
Especially over the last, I mean, not since then, I mean, just in the last year or 2 years since our freeze, but I figured you were talking about the other, I didn't mean to interject. I'm sorry.
No, it's just, you know, after the 83 freeze, it took a couple of years, and then we started seeing, you know, just because not all the fish died. Yeah. And, you know, it was just, but you could definitely see, like, you go fishing and it wasn't, you know, well, it wasn't like it was last time. You know, and everybody grumbled about, you know, 15 fish, blah, blah, blah. There's plenty of fish out here, but talking about the boat that we had and, you know, back then, you know, quick little segue here. We were at the fishing show. We had some guys that are younger guys. And they were talking about how, you know, the fishing's as good as it's ever been. And talking about catching, you know, how we caught, you know, a couple of 6s and some 5s. And my mom looked over at me. She goes, you remember when we used to go to Baffin when you were a kid? I'm like, yes, ma'am. She goes, you remember if we didn't catch a trout over 27, it was a shitty day. And I just kind of laughed. I'm like, yeah, I remember that days, Mom. She goes, yeah. She goes, these guys, to them, it is the best it's ever been. You know, it's all relative. 100%. And you don't want to, you know, like, well, back in my day, you know, I don't want to be that guy.
Well, sometimes you should, though. I think there's definitely points that should be made. Like, hey, it's your baseline may be up here, but in reality, like, fishing may not be as good as it was. And like, if you have people also explaining, hey, like, this is what it used to be, this is how we used to act, whatever, and all in its own accord, you can then, I think, start to kind of inspire people to take heed or take credence in what you're saying and how you present the way you look at the fish. And maybe it's an explanation as to why someone who like you is more conservation oriented is the way that they are.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And you know, it's kind of like, I want to go back to the article story that Mike McBride just wrote.
I love his writing
on Facebook.
Man.
I was like, I even commented, I was like, Mike, you have to write more, dude. The guy really does have a gift.
I hope he listens to this. I've been trying to get him on this thing. We said yes multiple times. Our logistics have been so bad for planning.
Yeah, he is a wordsmith. There's no doubt about it. Mike is a wordsmith, and that article he wrote about fishing the passes there in Mexico, and just like the way that it was, and that's the way it was down there. And in the lower Laguna, like I talked to my grandfather and guys that are long since gone that were old when I was, a teenager, they were in their 70s, my grandpa's age, that are Valley natives, came back to the Valley after World War II and started a business, and, they fished and everything. They're like, you have no idea. I mean, I remember talking to a friend of mine, and his dad, born and raised in the Valley, born in like 1920 something. He goes, yeah, I remember fishing Port Mansfield before the ICW was there.
Wow. I can only imagine.
And he's like, we used, like cotton spun Dacron line on big cane poles for catching trout. And he talks about some of the trout we used. He goes, oh yeah, he goes, now, you don't keep a fish that big, but yeah, I mean, you caught that, you taking that thing home to eat, that was in the, going into the Depression, 20s and 30s. I mean, everything that got caught hit a plate back then.
Yeah.
And he goes, oh yeah. He goes, some of the trout we drug up were, just like people, it'd be state records now.
Yeah.
I mean, we drag them up on the bank and smack them in the head and
take them home.
Fully, put them on ice and get them home. I'm like, that's just what you did back then. And I would have too, if I'd have grown up back then.
Of course.
We all would have. Like that's food. What's this throwing them back crap? That's food. You can't just run to HEB and we've got things pretty good now compared to where my grandparents had.
Yeah, we don't actually have to feed your family from going fishing.
Yeah.
Like some people say that they have to do.
Yeah. Okay.
World's smallest violin right here for you.
Yeah, that's we'll sell that $100,000 boat there, cowboy, and you can feed your family for a long time on that. But that's a whole different conversation. Yeah. But yeah, man, that's I think that's one of the good things about me being able to be around guys like that as a kid. And I remember a lot of the conversations, and they were part of that greatest generation. I mean, they'd start telling stories, and I'd just sit there and just listen. Like my grandpa talking with his buddies every now and then, talking about what they did in Normandy, stuff like that. And you're like, oh yeah, grandpa was in the war. And then you go watch Saving Private Ryan, and you're like, oh my God.
That's what he was doing. Yeah.
Oh my God, my grandpa was in that. Jesus, no wonder he's a little grumpy. Yeah. Got it, grandpa. Sorry about that. My bad. Yeah. But it was, I was very fortunate to be around those guys, and going back to, full circle, what we just talked about with the limits and everything, man, it's, I think the limits have helped, and I hope we can get back to a point where we have, and we talked about this earlier, we do have a world-class opportunity here. People that travel that are into catching big trout, and people that are into different things. If you're into elk hunting, you go to New Mexico and Colorado, because that's where the elk are. If you want to catch a fish with some shoulders on it in the speckled trout category, you go to here, and you go to the Panhandle of Florida and Space Coast and some places like that. That's where you go.
Yeah.
You go to Baffin, you go to Lower Laguna Madre.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all. And it's funny, like I do want to make this a point to reference the story that you were going to bring up about Mike before I interjected. But second, I did want to kind of juxtapose the Texas fishery with the Florida tarpon fishery, or Texas trout fishery with Florida tarpon fishery. And again, it's only because we made the point earlier while we were eating, which, by the way, great. The turkey that we just had, or what would you call that dish?
My buddy calls it turkey leg adobo.
Whatever that was.
It's phenomenal.
It was phenomenal. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
What I was getting at was, what we talked about was, I'm willing to bet because I know this, that there was a huge outcry in Florida when people said, stop killing tarpon, stop killing bonefish, stop killing permit. Granted, permit came later, but tarpon bonefish. And the people who would care to go kill them in mountain, whatever, eventually still had to go and get their fill of catching a tarpon. And so like the whole argument of this is my lifestyle, this is my money, whatever, Sure, I get it. You can keep the small ones like this. You can do what the limits say, keep the small ones. But this argument to try to keep the big ones and, I need to feed them. No. I just don't see it. And I do believe that, let's say, if a lot more of the people, and I can be on this soapbox all day, and I've done it for so long, but I really do believe if people actually took that mindset and we collectively were like, hey, like, let's treat these fish like they're our own people, sort of, I think you would see a huge evolution in Texas fishery for nothing but the better, to where everything becomes more savvy. I think you'd see new techniques being born out of just trying to outcatch the other competitors in just terms of size versus in terms of just the small ones to fill the stringer.
Yeah, I agree. And that's a mindset that usually comes with experience. Because I'm as guilty as anybody else about trying to stack as many fish in a cooler or on a strainer when I was younger.
Yeah, everyone is.
And, but I grew out of that, and it's about, I want to catch. Do I love catching trout? Some days you go out and you catch nothing but dinks, and I'm like, okay, I don't ever want to be like, well, that sucked. No, it didn't. You caught 150 fish today or something. It was a great day. You just didn't catch a big one. But you got to go hunting for the big ones. And I agree with it being on the trophy trout part of it. There is a group of people, and that's all they're focused on. But, everybody likes to just go out and catch trout. And if you want to be able to keep a few, I think you should be able to keep a few. It's a natural resource. However, compared to when I was a kid, a flats boat, guys were making homemade scooters and, loaning aluminum boats, running glass drawn, ski boats, tri-hull ski boats, and you'd putt in as far as you could and drop anchor and jump out, and then you'd wade for miles. You couldn't click the power pole, you couldn't put the trolling motor in, you didn't have the GPS.
Really back then. There was no skiffs.
Yeah, there were no skiffs. There was nothing. And now we have boats that'll get up in 6 inches of water, not just float, get up in it. And there's, we've expanded our range. We have all this digital equipment to help us. We have some of the best. I mean, that's always like one of those things, if you could go back, when you're standing there somewhere, can you imagine being here in like the 1940s, 1950s with modern equipment?
I think about that all the time.
It's like being at the Alamo with an M60, it's like, well, I could have changed the course of history, with a belt-fed weapon at the Alamo.
Yeah.
But, it's the same kind of principle. Is like, if I could have had a bag of down south lures and a couple of corkies back then,
and just a rod that didn't rust immediately, or not like a non-Shakespeare 5,000 reel. Yeah, totally get where you're coming from. Yes.
Yeah. So it's just like, but to the point of this, the point of the end of the argument there or whatever is, that has caused a lot more people to be able to be out here on the water. And there's just more people on the earth now. And we have water quality issues. There's a lot of things. I mean, Alazan Bay in Baffin Complex used to have grass, and it still does to a point, but not like it did. I mean, it had like, that south, not the turtle grass, but it had, it looked like the meadows.
So basically like 9 Mile. It used to be covered in grass, and then once they built that pass, people were running boats in. It's nowhere near the same as what we used to be.
Not the same. And, it's, everybody wants to point fingers. Well, it's because of water quality. It's because of bay shrimp and dragging the bottom. It's a collective everything. And, we're running our boats all over too.
Totally agree.
But I'm not going to be the guy, nor will I ever propose that, we're like, we need to shut this down and make it a sanctuary, because then nobody gets to enjoy it. But, however,
asterisks.
There's got to be, and it takes, and it's going to be it has to be on an individual level, kind of like what you're doing, what I do, what guys at CCA do, what a lot of guys are saying, like, hey man, you gotta respect this. And, we're catching some big fish. And like I caught a big fish, February last year, and inhaled a soft dine. And I was like, well, I can't keep that fish. If I show up to the boat dock and the game wardens there, and I've got a 28.5-inch trout, laying in a cooler, I'm going to get a ticket. Yeah. And I said, so I'll just wash your float off. Yeah. And That's why I like the whole tag thing. I don't think TPWD got it right on the 30 or better.
Yeah.
I just want to have a tag for that situation.
But the thing is, man, I feel like people would abuse a tag the same way they did the redfish.
People would. And there's some people out there, like, I remember I gave my dad a hard time one time for using his redfish tag. He sent me a picture of it holding up a big redfish. I was like, man, come on, Dad. He's like, hey, hold on. She swallowed a freaking Spook Junior. I mean, swallowed it.
Yeah, that fish wasn't going anywhere.
Down to the crushers. And then he goes, I worked on that fish in and out of the water for 10 minutes. And every time I try to let her go after I got it out, she just floated up. So I kept her and put the tag on her, and he goes, I wasn't just going to waste it. So tagged her and threw her in the cooler.
Man, I had watched a guy, and I was on Instagram or something, and I saw their story, and they were in the surf, and they'd hit a fish that was like 42, like big red. Oh man, sick fish, great, cool picture. Next picture or next slide, next story, fish was on the fillet table, and I slid up. I was like, bro, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And he goes, no, my clients wanted to smoke it. I've told the story like 3 times, but my clients wanted to smoke it. It was so good. In the back of my head, I was like, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Like, of all things. Well, anyways.
Well, you hit on something there. Guys that are on the water every day, the guides are maybe not trained biologists, but you need to listen to them because they're out there every day seeing stuff, catching fish. They can tell you when it's down or when it's hot or when something's going on. Got a water quality issue. You got a red tide, brown tide, whatever. They're like, yeah, something's up. Numbers are down. And I think it's going to be up to a lot of the guys that are guiding and in the public space going, you know what, probably, shouldn't do that. And most of the guys I know, they're all about keeping fish, and so am I. But a fish of that magnitude, unless it's just you can't revive it, then you tag it. Those are your big breeder fish. The fish that we're catching in the Laguna, those aren't your breeders. It's those big reds that are ones. And reds are doing great. They're a hardy fish. And when they lifted the net ban back in the 80s and all that other kind of stuff, the population got back. And they even talked about raising the limit on reds there for a while, bringing it up to 5. And
I didn't remember that at all.
Yeah,
maybe I wasn't paying attention, and it was before I was really involved in the space.
Yeah, it's been a while back, but they, when they were like, well, we're dropping the trout, let's raise the redfish up. And they're like, nah. And
what are you trying to compensate for?
And most people were like, even guys that are like all about keeping fish and guides that are like, putting fish in a cooler for clients, they're like, no, let's keep that right where it's at.
That would be 66% more kept fish per day per person. I mean, just thinking about the implications, just statistically speaking, would be absurd. Yeah. Like actually absurd.
Yeah. So anyhow, that's kind of my take on it.
I feel like we've already hit 45 minutes. We can run this as long as we want. I do want to talk about feral concepts.
Okay.
I feel like that is one thing I want to talk about. I want to talk about the idea, how it started, what you were doing, how people got wind of what you were doing, and then what it felt like to actually go mass market. Not mass market, but public.
Sure. Well, I got a sewing machine. Let's see, this is probably like 2014, 2015, somewhere in there. And just because I wanted to fix some of my own gear, I had a backpack and the strap was messed up and nobody had a machine that could work on it, because to sew through all those thick layers of material. And I was like, well, how much does a commercial, like a upholstery machine cost? So I went and priced one out. I was like, okay. So, put some money together and bought one. And messing around on it. And I'd always, like when I was in the military, like when I was on ship, that's where it kind of got, the fire kind of got started because we needed some gear made for what we were going to be doing. And they call them a dump pouch now. And that was kind of before they were a big mass market thing. There were some guys making them. There's a company called Tactical Tailor. That was one of the first guys to really do it. And they were making gear modifications for recon Marines, SEALs, Special Forces, Rangers, stuff like that. Like, hey, I need this pocket right here for this. And it's not
everything had a purpose.
Everything has a purpose.
Yes.
So I remember being on ship and we asked the rigger on the ship, like the guy in the sewing shop, like, hey, can you sew us that? He's like, yeah. And he goes, well, can you help me out? He goes, all I need you to do is fold this, get this seam and run it through this machine. So, we'd do it and we'd take turns helping him out, getting them built, and then he'd finish them out. I was like, that's pretty cool, man. The guy made his own stuff.
That's how you got into it?
Yeah. And I was like, so fast forward years later, and I did that. And I made my friend Justin Broadnax, Storm, he goes by Storm Broadnax, that owns La Pesca Lodge. I saw him, he had a waiter box on that I think that he had made. And I'm like, man, that thing's beat up. He goes, yeah. He goes, you think you can fix this? Think you can sew this or whatever with your machine? You know, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, I said, let me just make you one. So I made him a strap, gave it to him. He calls me like a week later, and Storm, I hope he listens to this. He is no
tell him to listen to it.
notorious for breaking stuff. I mean, the guy is a monkey. He breaks everything. If you want, that's what he tests my gear, because I know if it'll survive Storm, it'll survive anybody. So he got one of my waiter straps with the box and everything, made it up for him, gave it to him. And he was like, hey, can you make me another one of these? I'm like, what'd you do to that one? He goes, well, I gave it to one of my clients. They liked it.
Okay.
I was like, all right. So I made him a couple more, like 2 or 3. I said, hey, man, don't give all these away, man. Hang on. These are for your clients. So a couple of weeks later, he goes, hey, man, can you make me some more of those? I'm like, did you give them all away? He goes,
Mother.
He was like, yeah. He goes, well, I still got mine, but I gave 2 to my clients because they really liked it. He goes, you ought to do this. You ought to start a business and start making some of these, man. These are good. And I was like, okay, what am I going to call it? And that's when, I got on the phone with a buddy of mine. It's a real creative guy. And I was like, man, I'm trying to think of a name for doing this. And I always like the word feral because, my mom would call me that. Like, and me and my friends, you boys are just feral, the way y'all act. Good God, because I was kind of a pirate back in the day and doing stupid stuff. But I was like, I want to do it feral something. He's like, well, feral. I said, I don't want it to be feral outdoors or feral fishing or
something that's overused.
Something that's just feral outfitters, something that's just beat to death. And I said, I'm just messing with different concepts of things that work. And it might not always be fishing. It might be some other application. So I don't want to, pigeonhole myself.
Bingo. Yeah.
And he goes, well, what about feral concepts? I'm like, that's
it. Genius.
That's it. Bam. And I've called a friend of mine that's a designer, and I said, I want a logo that looks kind of retro, that's between Ford and Ferrari, but does not use their script because I don't want to get sued. She goes, okay, give me a minute. And like 2 days later, she came out with the feral logo that I use today.
Kidding.
Yeah. And she's brilliant. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. She's really good. And so that's how it got started. And then the tote bag that I make that's becoming somewhat popular. My dad would always take his stuff out of the boat when they'd run it up to the condo there in South Padre because he didn't want to leave tackle on his boat.
Of course, yeah.
Where boats were driving by all the time or
Yeah,
kayakers.
if it's out on the lift and people can just grab the stuff out of there.
Yeah, or even on the water, even better. They can pull right up to it and jump on the boat. So he would always take his stuff in and out, and he was always carrying like 3 or 4 bags worth of crap to the boat and shoving up under the console. I'm like, man, I said, what are you carrying all that shit for? And he's like, well, maybe a bag. And maybe one that doesn't get wet. I'm like, yeah, no problem, Dad. And started playing around. I used an old lineman's bag, canvas lineman's bag that has like, it's like brass rivets or steel rivets in it. Of course, those rusted, but that was the first concept for that. And I sewed pockets in it for, putting a knife in and all this other kind of stuff. And then I saw that bottom, that foam rubber bottom on a backpack.
Foam rubber bottom, like the ones that I know what you mean. I'm wondering. Yeah, I'm wondering. I don't know why I couldn't. It was hard for me to picture it for a second, but I got it now.
Yeah, and I was like, So I saw that at a place that I bought some material from, and they made mold this stuff, and I was like, well, y'all do that? And they're like, oh yeah, we do that for like tool bags and big duffel bags and stuff like. I was like, and they had an extra one there that was kind of narrow. That they'd use for a tool bag. And I'm like, can I have that one? They're like, yeah, that's a sample. Take it. And so I took it home and made a bag out of it and started playing around with it. And I was like, man, that's going to work. I just need a little wider because I want it to be able to fit a tackle box down in it.
Of course.
So it's the same width as a 3700 series tackle box. So I can carry 7 to 8 of those boxes in that bag.
Yeah.
And, I was like, cool. So I sewed up a couple of them, got the material, sewed them up, and they were pretty ugly, because I've never claimed to be a good seamstress.
I mean, you're doing a damn good job is all I'm saying.
Well, I've had, there was a lot of mistakes that nobody's seen, and I'm still not, compared to the guys that do it every day professionally, sewing shops, I'm a mere, I'm a mere novice. But my whole thing has always been prototyping stuff, seeing what's going to work. And then I get it to somebody that really knows what they're talking about and go, hey man, can you make this look pretty? And they're like, yeah. And like this Vietnamese lady in here, her name's Oan, and she does some sewing for me sometimes. And I remember the first thing I brought her a chest rig for like turkey hunting that I brought to her. I was like, hey, what do you think of this? She goes, did you sew this? I'm like, yeah. She goes, it's really bad. And I'm like, yes, ma'am, it's not good. She kind of shook her head. She goes, what are you trying to do here? I'm like, well, I was hoping that she goes, no, let me show you how to do that the right way. Because people that work with material every day, they probably have the equivalent of a geometry degree.
Yes.
They're like, if you fold it here and then fold this and then bring this over and then sew that, see how much easier that is. You're like, oh my God, it's just little things that they do because they work with it every day. And so I've learned a lot from watching them. And that's, so the tote bag was born, and then, the waiter boxes were doing their thing with the slings that I sew. And then I always liked wearing, and it kind of came from turkey hunting. I made a chest rig for carrying like a small pair of binos, a couple extra shells, turkey calls, whatever, in a chest rig because I don't like wearing a vest. And like the deep South, wearing a vest with a pad on it, leaning up against a tree is great. But hunting in South Texas, we don't have a whole lot of trees to lean up against.
So we got a lot of sun.
Yeah, and there's a lot of stuff crawling around on the ground around here. You really don't want to be in contact with the ground. Yeah, you know what I mean. So it's I carry a little chair with me, and I wear my chest rig, and I've got my shotgun, and that's it. And that's what I run with, and it's a lot lighter. Got a lot more freedom, and all of this, before I go any further, was all inspired by wearing a plate carrier with magazines on it overseas.
I was about to ask actually what spurred all this innovation. So I'm glad that you got to it before I did.
That's where it all comes from, because if you're riding around in a vehicle, which we were vehicle mounted most of the time, you had to be able to get to your stuff, and it had to be, it couldn't be hard to get to, and it had to be extremely simple, and it had to hold up. Because it's just, and if your life depends on it, it has to work. There's not like, oh, this is so. No.
It's an 80% success rate.
If you go out to anybody that's in the military now, and they're in a high threat type environment, there is no wasted space. Like there's no frivolity there. I mean, it's the basics. And that's what I tried to get down to the gear, like with the flat satchel, which has been probably the most successful product that I have. That came from, I'm not the first person to do that. A company a long time ago did one, but it was like one that you wore over your shoulder, like a satchel. But I wanted a chest rig because sometimes I wanted to keep stuff dry on me. And it was always like, where do I carry my phone or a camera? I want to carry that up high. You can't carry that in the water, or you're wearing a backpack, which is just torture.
Not to mention, like, especially if the backpack's low, the acid of the backpack sometimes will get wet, and you don't know if, I'm with you 100%.
So I was like, okay, I'm going to do a chest rig, and I want to be able to fold out in front of me, because I saw a guy, he made a map. It was a map carrier for carrying a map. Some of the guys calling for air and Artie, and the guys that are navigating, they use it, or it can just pop out right in front of them. They can look at it and it pops back up. And I'm like, that's cool. What if we put a tackle box in
I have, so my roommate right now, and I don't mean it's such a cool story. I've never heard anyone give me a reason to say a story. His name is David Snyder, and his dad passed away recently. His name was Dave Snyder, big fly fisherman, huge fly fisherman. And before he passes, it was probably a decade ago, maybe, no, like half a decade ago, 5 years ago, I had gone over to David's house, and we were hanging out in the garage looking at his dad's bikes, and his dad kind of comes in and, just gives a little bit of shit for just being kids, and then walks inside, and we go inside, and David goes, hey, Dad, Andres caught a tarpon on a fly rod. His dad eyes lit up. He was like, wait, what? Ran over from the studio. We started bonding over that. And before I left, he was, Andres, I want you to take 2 of these. And he gave me what sounds like a similar chest vest, but it was one that he made with his father. And they never did it. They never did it to produce it. But it was cool because the thing that stuck out about it was the fact that it did have a thing for flipping out like that, but it wasn't for anything but flies. So he would be just tie on a new fly right there. And that is so Cool, man. I don't know. That is a story I never thought I'd tell on this.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's a lot of stuff out there that people have come up with that'll never see the light of day. That's genius.
Which was one of my next questions for you, but keep going.
But it's just, you know, and I remember some of the old rigs and I was like, how am I going to do this? And I have, you know, those manila folders that you can keep files in. You can buy them at HEB in the office section, you know, that kind of accordion out.
Yeah.
And I had one and I was getting some papers out of it and I was holding the back of it and the front of it fell forward and stopped right there. And I went,
There was your design idea.
and I just stopped and I looked at it and I started messing around with it. And I actually cut it and like taped it back to like the size, you know, everything's got to be on the chest, you know, what we say between the nipples, you know?
Yeah.
And I said, that's where it's got to be. And I was like, that's going to work. I said, I've got to find out a way to put a harness on it and clip it in. And you could also wear it as a satchel if you wanted to. So how am I going to keep a phone in there? And I messed around with a pocket and dropped my phone in. I'm like, okay, that'll work. It's got to have something where I can attach it up to the front or a pocket on the inside. And it's got to be able to hold a tackle box.
Yeah.
And so I took a 3600 series box that you know, most people have several of those laying around. And I put that down and traced out on a piece of material, traced it out. And I said, that's how big the panel's got to be. And just started sewing stuff up together. And I remember I was wearing the prototype 2 years ago, right after the Rio Grande Valley show, not last year, but year before. And I had the prototype on and I went fishing with my buddy Storm and I caught a 31 with that rig on. It's green. It's a green rig. It's in there in the shop. It's a green rig. And I remember taking the picture, you know, and I was trying to hide it a little bit, you know, with the fish. And, but luckily it was green and you couldn't really see it because it was dark. I caught that fish at like 6:30 in the morning. I mean, barely raised the light and caught that fish. And, I used that rig for, I think, another month and a half, 2 months. And I gave a couple to some friends. I said, hey, that I knew that fished a lot. And I'm like, no logos on it, nothing like that. So I said, try this. Tell me what it needs. So it needs a longer piece of Velcro here. And this needs to be shorter and, you know, don't have as big as a gap in the door in case I just want to throw loose items in there. They don't just spill out. I'm like, okay. So, you know, just little things, you know, make it a little bit narrower. You know, I said, well, it's got to fit this box or a couple of small boxes. And they were like, okay. So that's, you know, everything that I've done, you know, the chest rig, the tote bag, some of the new stuff like the salt wallet, the snot rags.
I was about to say that, yeah. Yeah,
the snot rags. My friend Troy Fowler and Brett Sweeney were both like, dude, you need to make something that we could like wear that'll like clip into your waders or clip into your chest rig or clip onto your thing, onto your wading harness or wading strap that we can wipe trout slime on. Cause you know, like my old wading jackets and my old waders, you can see it.
Yeah, you can see it.
They're darker on the legs and they're darker on the arms where you're going like this in the water. And I'm like, well, like a microfiber towel, but God, who wants to mess with that?
Yeah.
But I started using it and I sewed some up that didn't have like the pretty stuff. I went and bought some microfiber towels, I think at the auto parts store, you know, that you can buy, you know, a bundle of 20 or whatever, the bright colored ones. Sewed a strap to it of different lengths. And said, tell me which length you like the best. And my buddy Fowler was like, hey, take this strap. And instead of just doing a little loop on the end, I said, just do one big loop that's about 9 inches long, 8 inches long. So I did that and sewed it in, gave it to him.
For what purpose? What was the difference?
And I started doing it. The other ones, once you looped them in, they were a little too long and they were getting in the water.
Yeah, okay, I get that. So double length, but it goes all the way, so you have less length overall total.
Yeah,
okay.
He goes, well, you can still wipe stuff off, stuff it in the back, whatever, and you've got it. So anyhow, all the stuff that I do, I may have the idea for. And there's some things that I've had the idea for. They're either too expensive to sew, it's too complicated. You know, like ideas are great, and I love ideas. And I have a lot of people say, "Hey, man, have you ever thought about doing this?" I'm like, "Yeah, I've thought about it, but I start looking at it from a production standpoint now. Like, yeah, man, that's going to cost a good joy." And I get everything made here in the U.S. I don't have anything done overseas.
I may have a good idea for you that my friend asked me about to like share. Now that I was remembering it, but I'll show you. I'll tell you later.
Okay. Yeah. But I do have some good ideas on stuff, but some of it is just, it's too expensive to get done here. I could get it made overseas probably. And right now I'd rather support an American job.
Goddamn right. Gulf of America, baby.
And I've got sewing shops that do stuff for me, and I pay them to make stuff. And I try to buy materials when I can that are very compliant U.S. materials. Sometimes it's just not available and I can't get it, and I have to buy stuff from overseas. I'm forced to because it's just not available. And I don't like doing it. And it's one of those things like you just got to grit your teeth and do it, because it's either that or the stuff doesn't get made.
Yep.
So, but I try really hard to do everything American made if I can. If there is an option in the United States that I can buy, I usually buy it. And that's why sometimes my stuff costs a little more. I mean, I could get some of this stuff made overseas for nothing.
They probably break a little bit easier. The materials won't hold up to, especially the saltiness of our base systems. Like a lot of the little things matter, especially when you're fishing the lower Laguna Madre with such a high salinity point.
Yeah. And, it's one of those things that I believe in supporting an American job versus a foreign job. I want to keep my money in my country. And that's just, again, that's my opinion and my belief. Not everybody's from there, because a lot of people.
I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
Except my bug. I came from Italy, but the rest.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. As I talked to you on a Chinese made cell phone, so talking in a mic that might probably made in Germany or China or wherever.
Most likely.
We're a world economy now.
I got it's German, I think.
Yeah. So, some things you just can't help. But if I have a choice, I'm going to do it here. And also, you pay a little bit more for my stuff. But my stuff, if it comes unwound, the sewing goes bad, you break something, and it's on us, we replace it for free.
Do you have people who are like bad players who try to like tell you, hey, it broke, but it's your fault? But
you know what? No. The biggest problem I have is, and all boxes do this after a while, Wade boxes. The only one I've found that really is like waterproof is that Busby box.
Busby box? I've never heard of it.
Yeah, it's called Busby, and it's a sealed box, and it's got a clear lid on it. And I think after a while, even those, if you get a hook in that channel where that little foam gasket is, or over the little dividers, and it gets any kind of buckle, or if that box gets left out in the heat and warps, they're going to get water. And sometimes they just come out of the mold, and they either, I don't know what causes this, because I'm not able to talk to the guys at production at Plano or at Flambeau, where I get my boxes from, which are American companies. And sometimes the hinges are not even on the back, and you'll have water finds a way. And
so you see one atom big enough.
I had a couple guys come up to me at the fishing show, and they're like, man, I love your stuff, but my box is leaking. I'm like, how long have you had it? And they're like, man, I've had it about 6 months to a year. And I reached in the bin and just gave them another one. I said, here you go. They're like, man, I'll pay for it. I'm like, nope. I said, here you go.
Yeah.
I said, and they're like, man, you got my business for life. And that's why you do that.
You think that's a big proponent as to why you don't have to deal with people trying to like do you dirty or try to like get a freebie out of it, because they know you're pretty much 100% like real. You're like, hey, like if this product actually falters, I'll trust you at your word for it. I give you respect. You give it back. Here's like a replacement, something like that.
I've asked a couple of guys, I'm like, send it to me. Like, and I'll pay for the postage. But I said, but I want you to send it to me. I've had a couple of chest rigs come back just for some sewing, and it was on the cell phone pocket. And it was an easy fix.
Yeah.
Just restitch it and it's good to go. When you're making them by the hundreds, I get them made in runs of 300 to 400 at a time. And, it's, humans are making it on machines, and sometimes stuff just gets messed up, just like with a car or whatever. So, but if it's on us, we'll fix it.
Wow.
Yeah. We'll fix it or replace it. So that's, trying to do the right thing. Sometimes no good deed goes unpunished, but to answer the question, no, I really haven't had any bad actors try to
That's
get
really
one over
fortunate, I think, in this industry. I feel like so many people try to like play the system. Like we talked about tags earlier. When there's a way to abuse something, I think people do. But I think that having respect from your community and not looking at them as a customer base, but more so like a group, or if you want to even take it a little bit further, like a pseudo family, you tend to have trust and respect, and that's rare. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was, has there ever been any prototypes that you've been excited to kind of start working on that you realized that, oh man, I don't know if I can make this work? Like things that you're like, ooh, like that could have been something special.
Yeah. I've got one out there right now that I really like. I'm just trying to find a way to
Then
do
don't
it.
talk about it. Never mind. Maybe if it hadn't worked, then yes.
I'm just trying to find a way to make this, make it where I can make it economically to be able to sell. Because the way, on the business side of things, you know, if I make something and it costs me $35 to make, I want to make, you know, some margin on that, obviously. But I also have to think of my dealers. Like, what can I sell it to my dealers for where they can add 35 to 40 points to it to make their cut? You know, because that's where most of them, you know, it can be anywhere from it depends on the product. You know, it could be apparel, it could be whatever it is, but it could be anywhere from, some guys are like, I'm happy making 20% on that because I'm making my margin up on something else. But I've got to think that, like, okay, what can I sell this to my dealers for? Because I honestly, if I didn't have to fill another online order, I'd be okay with that. Yeah. I'd rather send everything to my independent dealers. Absolutely.
You would actually work directly with dealers.
Absolutely. I love working with dealers. Dealers get the word out.
Absolutely.
Dealers get the word out. I've run into a lot of guys like, oh man, I'm using your stuff, and I'll ask them their name, and you know, I'll go and look, and I was like, well, he didn't buy it from me. I said, where'd you buy it? And like, oh, I bought it at, you know, Hook, Line, and Sinker in the Valley, or I bought it at Waterloo, or I bought it at Anglers Anonymous, or Jecco's, or Bayou City Angler, or you know, one of those. You know, they buy them from all over the place, and I was like, that's cool. So they're seeing it in there, you know, or a lot of times, you know, if I'm really low on inventory, I'll zero everything out and be like, go get it at Roy's. Yeah. You know, go get it at Roy's in Corpus. Go get it here. Go get it at Waterloo. Go get it at Anglers Anonymous. Because it keeps that machine going. It keeps their register flowing. And, you know, how many times have you done this? You go into some place and you're just looking for, like, I'm looking for a certain bait. And then I see something like, oh, man, that's kind of cool. You know, and you end up buying a fish bag or a net or something else, you know, or you went in for a bag of plastics and you come out with, you know, 8 Corkies and, you know, and your wallet screaming at you, you know, because you spent you went in there to spend $20 and you spent $300.
Like me, I spent like 120 on a net.
I mean, I'm don't get me getting near a good tackle shop. I'll try to hurt myself, but stuff that I really probably don't need. I've got 14 colors out there. I get it from my dad. Yeah, if you've got one, you need 4, you know, and, but I like the idea of being able that my dealers, you know, have the faith in me and my product's good enough for them to sell.
Oh yeah, but if they feel like you're going out of your way to make sure they get business, then why wouldn't they put you at the front of the store or something like that, where, you know, they have the high traffic areas, stuff like that. So I see it's like it's an Ouroboros. It just one feeds the other. Yeah,
exactly. And you know, dealers are dealers, they got stuff on the shelf, they want to sell it. You know, they're not going to pay all this money to send it there and watch it collect dust. They want it to sell. So you have to do, you know, I have to do my part too. I have to market, and that is having. I like it that people have the faith in my gear. It's quality. It's not going to break. The warranty's good. You know, I'm going to back it up. And I've had a lot of guys saying, "Hey, man, you just make good stuff, and that's why I like it." And it's American made. And I'm like, "Well, that's pretty cool."
It's a goddamn right.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. You know, yeah, I did fight for something, so that's awesome. So yeah, it's cool how the whole machine works. But I really do like supporting the dealers. It's just I like the whole business aspect of it as well.
That's just a really good point to make, and I'm glad that you did, especially now that I'm starting to work with my own dealers and stuff through the book, and it kind of brings perspective into things. Yeah. One of the things I wanted to talk about, you're one of the few people that I know that have ever actually gone to fish the Mexican side of the Lower Laguna Madre. Oh man! And I want you to kind of get into some of those stories, what it was like with people you're fishing with back then. And I see you told me it was your dad and your dad's friends as well, right? Yeah. I'm really curious for you to kind of describe or illustrate what the ecosystem was like.
Well, this has been a long time.
Hey, do whatever you can.
And it's been 30 years since I've done that, more than 30 years. When I was a teenager, I went down a few times with my dad, you know, and we most of the time we were bass fishing. We go down and fish, Guerrero, Española, that area down there, dove hunting, duck hunting, fishing. It's paradise. And a couple of those times that we went down, we went over through the, through basically a ranch. And I remember we had to go through like 7 or 8 gates and to get to this spot. And you're going through this brush, and all of a sudden you pop out and you're like, wow, there's the Gulf right there. And you're looking at this pass and just going out there, and there's nobody on the beach. It reminds me of being like when I was a little kid, being on Big Shell, and 30 miles down the island and not seeing another soul on the beach. And they're literally like, if you saw somebody, it was like, or there's a guy riding a horse or something down the beach, and it's just like you're just by yourself. And I just remember, like anything else, the tide coming in, coming out, when your best shot was, but then going up into the, where the river came out, where the pass was. And, there's no jetty or anything there. So it's just a big river, big alluvial plain there. And that's where I caught my first snook.
I was about to say, man, I know Larry Haynes, one of the few people I know who would go in there, like into there with this boat, or if I don't know, maybe running a shamrock. I'm not too sure on that. Boston Whaler, I think, might have been. And he would go in there and not sight fish, blind cast for really big snook.
Yeah.
That's so cool to think about.
And I didn't catch a huge snook. It was a, 20 some odd inch snook, but it was my first one.
Yeah.
And I just remember freaking out like, oh my God, I finally caught a snook, and this is, coming from a kid that, back in my day, I can't believe
you did it.
I'm getting old, man. Back in my day, but Flip Pallet used to have a show,
Walker's Cay.
Yeah, Walker's Cay Chronicles that was on ESPN. And every Saturday, if I wasn't in the woods or fishing, or we'd VHS record it, to watch it later, but I remember my dad, he goes, this is the only show worth watching on TV. Him and the Jose Wahebe show, the Spanish Fly show. We watched.
Andy Mill had a show in conjunction as well too at around the same time.
Yeah, and it just but Flip show, just the cinematography and the storytelling. I mean, it was just, it's still today, I think, one of the best ones ever done, and gave me some inspiration for later in life. For working on different projects with people. I never did any of the quote unquote filming, but I helped basically on the production side of wildlife films, and seeing watching some of the Yeti films, and like, that's how you do it. You tell a story with some gorgeous shots in some far-flung places that people may never get to go, that are aspirational. And everything Flip was doing, was, most of it was in Florida, but just seeing how he did it and how he told the story. Nobody can tell a story like that guy. And I thought that was really, that was such a huge inspiration, watching that show. It was like, man, that's the way you do it right there. That guy's living the dream.
All that inspiration from a fly fisherman. Huh?
Yeah, man, I know it, and I loved it. I have
put it on the record. Put it on the record.
Yeah, I've caught a few fish on fly. I'm not as scared to throw the fly.
Good, man. Good.
I like doing it. I actually fish with Javi Lopez down there on the Arroyo.
Yeah, no, I've met him. I've met him before. Yes,
hell of a great guy. Javi's one of the good guys, man, and he's one of my friends, and just a really good fly fisherman, and just a great dude. And a lot of my fly fishing experiences come from being with him. And I remember when I first came home from Iraq, we were talking about fly fishing real quick. My dad, he's like, man, I really want to go down. He goes, we had a shallow sport, and, we were just conventional fishermen mostly, but we gotten into, we built a couple of fly rods. A guy named Dennis Freeman used to have a shop here in San Antonio where you can build your own fly rods. So, and Dad just, being Dad, walked in and was like, oh, you're building rods here. Cool. So we built a rod.
Did you ever get to see the San Antonio Casting Club and the Austin one?
Mm-mm.
So we used to, if I'm not wrong, we used to have a casting club in San Antonio, one in Austin. They both went out of business, but I was just wondering if maybe you had a chance to see them.
Dennis may have been associated with them, but Dad got into the whole fly fishing thing for a while, and of course I did too. And when I got home from my first tour in Iraq, and after 2003, we went and fished with Scott Sparrow.
No kidding.
Yeah. And that was like one of my first real introductions into casting to tailing reds. You know, we'd sight casted reds a lot, but never with the fly.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was just a totally different experience. I remember I caught my biggest trout on the fly completely accidentally fishing with my dad. We got up north of, way up north of the convention center on the east side.
It's like Gaswell area, stuff like that.
East of Three Islands, that area.
Okay.
Yeah, Gaswell, same area. And we got out of the boat and, you know, we were in that real skinny stuff and there was some, you know, fairly still day. You know, you could see fish working, fish, you know, cruising, taking shots at fish with the fly, you know, making horrible casts.
Just like me, don't worry.
All that. And I remember the wind came up and we finally got on some reds. The wind came up and the fish got active and we saw some tails. So we're like, all right, you know, so I go in and dad's a little bit behind me. He's like, hey, you know, go ahead and take a shot at them. He goes, because if they move on, they're probably going to move my way and I'll get a shot at them. I'm like, all right. So, you know, I back cast way too many times and try to lay that fly down in there in front of those fish and just let my cast go too early. Fly blows 3 feet behind the pod.
Happens.
And I'm like, oh man. So I start stripping it in really fast and it just gets smoked. And I'm like, all right, I got one, you know, got one out and it was a 28-inch trout. My dad was like, you are the luckiest SOB that I've ever met.
My biggest was a 30 and a 9.5 pound fish on a 6-weight blind casting.
Wow.
Blind casting. I was just screwing around with some friends. I was like, whatever. Like I was on a fly from Bass Pro Shops. Nothing had any purpose to me. I was just there having fun. Was just throwing at any mullet I saw just to practice my accuracy and stripping it in. Fish ate it, kept stripping, lost the fish, kept stripping again. Fish ate it again. Didn't know what it was. It didn't come in within 30 foot for a long time. We fought that fish for like maybe, I don't know, 6 minutes, 5 minutes. Like it was a long time for a trout. And when we got her on the thing, 9.5 and
Good
30.
Lord.
And
That's
I was
awesome.
just blown away. I was like,
That's awesome.
And the funny thing is, we saw tailing fish all day after that. I, for some reason, could not catch another fish. And I was like, I wasted all my good karma already. And
You used up all your mojo.
end of the year too. So it was right before I got more karma. We were chilling.
Yeah. Yeah. But with 30-inch fish, you know, like that's one of those things like, well, I can quit today.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I can quit today. I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Speaking of big fish, I wanted you to tell me about that 33 on the wall.
Got 33 on the wall.
So absolute tank.
Yeah. She's 32 and 7/8.
Not 33 to me.
And a little over 10. And I was working for a company out of Salt Lake City at the time, company called Silencer Co. Makes suppressors.
Mm-hmm.
I was out there and I was working for them. And I was flying home back to San Antonio. And my friend Aubrey Black called me. And this is when him and Sally had Baffin Bay Rod and Gun there in Baffin, here in Rivera. And he called me and he was like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm sitting in, you know, getting ready to get on an airplane in, you know, 30 minutes. I'm in Salt Lake City. He goes, well, when you land in San Antonio, pack up all your shit and get down here. I'm like, okay, you know, why? He goes, dude, we got a front coming. This is in December. It's like December 16th. It was dark moon. I remember that because he goes, we have a dark moon over at 10 a.m. pre-front. He goes, it's going to happen. He goes, it's going to happen. Somebody's going to stick a big one. He goes, somebody's going to stick a big one and we need some photos to start selling trips and blah, blah, blah.
You were already doing photography at the time?
No, not really.
Oh, so they were going to have a photographer with y'all?
No, we didn't have a photographer with us, nothing. He was just taking pictures and posting it going, hey, you know, we're catching big trout. And that, I'm telling you, man, that sells trips. And, you know, we got out there and we were fishing in Baffin and we caught a few fish, caught a couple of good ones. You know, 26, 27, Sally stuck a good one. Aubrey stuck a good one. I caught a couple of decent fish and we got on this one stretch where we were waiting and we'd been waiting for 45 minutes, but not a bite. And we were like, man. So Aubrey was like, well, I'm going to walk back and get the boat. And me and Sally kept waiting and I moved up a little bit shallower because I kept seeing some activity around an old duck blind. And I was like, that's interesting. I was like, something's up there chasing him. I thought it was a redfish. I was like, oh, there's a red up there. Got something, you know, something hemmed up shallow because there was some, you know, mullet jumping around and, you know, just the water was nervous, you know, to not use an overused term. And I cast it up in there a few times, you know, working it back, working a little white paddle tail, which was one of Aubrey's favorite things to throw. And threw up in there and my third, fourth cast just gets freaking smoked. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's a good red, you know? So I'm fighting it like a redfish. You know,
like
I'm just like,
haphazardly,
just not giving it any breaks, just getting it in. And I brought that fish in, and the water was real muddy. And I was about knee deep, and that fish finally came up and showed herself, and my legs buckled. I was like, oh my God.
Go away.
I was like, oh my God. Sally's like, what is that? I was like, it's a big ass trout. It's a freaking monster ass trout. And I won't repeat it here what, my exact words were, but there's a lot of colorful language. And she's like, all right. She's like, well, settle down. She was like coaching me, like, settle down, man. Damn. Like you've been here before. I'm like, I have been here before.
You see the size of this thing?
It's freaking gigantic. And finally got it up. And I remember I had a boga on me. And when she hit that bait, she hit it right outside the corner of her mouth. And it stuck her good. She was stuck good, but she wouldn't open her mouth for the boga. And I tried to get her, I had her up there 3 or 4 times, get up, and she'd swim off. I'd get her up again, and she wouldn't open her mouth. And so I'm sitting there trying to force that. And I'm like, I don't want to be messing with this boga and pop that hook out. So I'm like, man, what am I going to do? So I reached down and tried to grab her across the back of her, across her back by her gills, but she was too big.
Yeah. It's slipped right out.
I mean, it filled up, and I've got fairly good sized hands, and she filled up my entire hand. I'm like, oh my God. I was saying, I've got my rod underneath my arm, and I'm sitting there trying to get a boga in, and she's flopping around. And finally, in extremis, grabbed her like a sack of flour and stuck her to my chest, and she flopped out of my arms. And Sally goes, oh shit, no. And fish hits the water, kind of flops around again. I reach up, and when I did that, I just muscled it right back behind her head. And when I did, she popped her mouth open, and I popped the boga in and just hung on to it for a second and just stood there. I was like, I got her. And she's like going, oh my God. She goes, you almost gave me a freaking heart attack. We've got it on video somewhere. Oh, really funny. And I held it up, and Sally's like, oh yeah, that's a big one. That's a big one. And we measured her, and Aubrey just come pulling up. He's like, what the hell's going on up here?
You're about to find out.
And I pulled that trout out. He goes, that's what we came for right there. And that's still one of my most memorable trips. That and when my dad caught his personal best. That was one.
Tell me that one.
Well, again, I was fishing with Sally. And
why have I heard that name so many times? Sally Black.
Sally Black. She's been doing it for a long time.
I feel like she's actually on my list of people I want to reach out to.
If she's not, she should be.
I'm almost 1,000%, because you said it immediately. I was like, I know that name.
Yeah, she should be.
You should give me her number after this.
I will. And she's been doing it. She's been guiding since the early 90s or late 80s. Or might even be before that. But she's been doing it a long time.
Okay.
I started out in Rockport. And, and then her and Aubrey got married in the early 2000s, and then they did the whole Baffin thing, and she can go over the chronology with you. But again, I'd caught my big fish, and I'm like, Dad, it's like it is right now. We're kind of back in that cycle. Just to kind of go off script here for a second. We're back in that cycle now.
Define what do you mean by that cycle?
We are starting to see a lot of
big fish
show up again. Like, Jerry Juarez with JRZ Lures.
I know. Yes, I know the lure. I never met the guy.
Yeah. Well, one of his buddies, they're working on an experimental lure right now. One of his friends caught like a 9.7 a couple of days ago. Just, retarded.
Yeah.
Huge fish, And I'm starting to see it. And I was talking to Colton Blackwell about it. I was like, hey man, this is kind of reminiscent of like 2014 to 2017 run.
That's what I've been telling people. I'm like, man, I'm so excited for this season.
Yeah. And he's like, yeah. And I've talked to a couple other guys like Storm. He's like, yeah, we're getting, he goes, this reminds me of that run where there was just a lot of, not just, because last year it was like a lot of 25s to 27s were caught.
And I feel like a lot of the bigger fish were caught towards the end of the year.
Yeah. Yeah. But we're seeing this like a year ago, year and a half, 2 years ago, you're seeing, 24s, 25s, 26s. And then last year it was 26, 27, 28s, a few 29s. Now those 29-inch fish have graduated up
to the 30 class for sure, 100%.
And so we just have a bigger population of big fish right now. So anyhow, that's what we were facing when I was out with my dad, that situation.
This is 2014, right?
This is 2015 because it was January.
Okay.
So I caught that fish December of 14 and we were out January 15. It was post front. Bluebird skies, where you could see the spider webs floating. I mean, super high pressure. It was struggle bus all day, like couple of hits, throwing everything in the tackle box. And I remember I had a fish hit and missed it. And it was one of those days like, you're like, that might be the only bite that I get all day. I remember Sally hooked into one and lost it. And we just kept grinding and kept fishing this one spot because it was one of those, like, I know they're here. It's just, they're just not eating. It's super high pressure. Like, we're just going to have to, you basically have to hit them on the head to get them to eat it. And I remember my dad, you know, he was in his 70s at that point and, you know, still out there doing it. And he was like, I could tell he was getting tired because, you know, he's arching his back and just, you know how it is when you've been waiting all day, shoulders hurt and all that. He was like, remember he pulled out it was I've got it out there. It's retired. It's a red back with a gold foil middle, Catch 2000, Mirror Lure Catch 2000, which is a great bait. Kind of a subsurface kind of bait.
Like a stick bait?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a plug, but I mean, it's just very slow, suspending kind of bait. And I remember he looks over me, he goes, I'm going to throw this ugly son of a bitch. I've thrown every other freaking bait in my box, blah, 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 blah. You know, just like, you know,
All right, dude, do it.
F this, I'm throwing this. So he puts it on there, and about third cast, I look over and I'm watching him. He's just doing that, you know, that pop, 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 letting it sit, pop, 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 running down the slack, letting it sit. And I look over at him and I watch his rod tip just go, doop. And I just remember I was watching him, you know, he like a cheetah, you know, he was just kind of got in a crouch and reeled up the slack and goes, yeah, boy. And then just hits it. And I was like, oh shit. And immediately that fish just started taking off. I'm like, man, you got big ass redfish. He goes, nope, it's a big trout. So you sure? He goes, yes, I'm sure. And Sally was like, oh, you got a good, you know, it's probably a good red. He goes, nope, it's a big trout.
Yeah.
So I backed off and watched him fight it. And then my dad's not one of those guys that's, you know, high sticking it. I mean, he gives that fish, he
works it.
He'd like to have a fish fight. So he wanted to have that fish fight as long as possible. You know, so he's just giving that fish all she wants. You know, if she wants to take, he gives it to her. And he finally gets it up and he's like, you got a net? I'm like, nope, got a bogus. And we're going to have to make this, you know,
make it work.
Let's make it work. And she circled him 3 or 4 times. And finally she came up and clipped that boga in her mouth. And he just went, oh. He's like, I've been waiting 72 years for that fish. And she was 31 and a little over 9.
Wow.
Absolute tank of a fish. And took a bunch of pictures. And dude, it was cold. We were cold. Oh my God, we were cold. Because it was like 40 something for the high.
God damn.
It was freaking cold. And I remember he caught that fish and, you know, we're all wind chapped and just cold. And I was like, I don't know about you, but I'm done. He goes, yeah, I'm done. He goes, he goes, we don't even have to fish tomorrow. I'm done.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, you know, so you don't want to fish tomorrow? He goes, yeah. He goes, she's 31, but I want a 34. So yeah, let's go tomorrow. Yeah. That's just the way it was.
If that fish would have been 34, you probably would have never heard the end of it too.
Yeah. He would say that he caught a bigger trout than me. And I guarantee I never heard the end of it. He talked shit to the day he died, literally. You know, the last fish he caught with me, I was talking to Chris about this the other day. He was, you know, he had pancreatic cancer and we were fishing up in that 3 Islands area. And he was getting ready to have to go in for chemo and all that again. And he knew, I mean, he knew what was up. And, you know, he was very, very stoic and very pragmatic about it. He was like, I don't know how this next round's going to go, so I want to fish as much as possible until I have to go do this. I'm like, all right, Dad. So it was Father's Day, 21. And we got up there and I called Javi and I was like, hey man, I said, I want to get the old man on some reds. And he's like, go up in that area, 3 Islands, gas well area. He goes, they're there up on the break. He goes, just get on the break and drift and they're there. And he puts right on them. And my dad tied on a gold spoon sitting on the cooler in front of the console. Mom was on the deck and I was in the back. And every time I get ready to cast, my mom would be hooked up or he'd be hooked up. So I finally just put my rod up. I'm like, I'm just going to be I'm going to be a freaking deckhand today. And netting fish for Dad and for, and he caught probably 7 or 8 fish. A couple of them were oversized on a spoon. He reeled up and it's starting to get hot and I could tell he was playing out, you know, cause he'd already gone through 1 round of chemo and that just beat you to the floor, you know? And he was like, oh man, I'm tired of kicking your ass. I was like, take me home. He was like, yeah. He goes, I'm ready to go home. I need to go home and lay down, get some fluids and blah, blah, blah. He goes, that was good. And reeled up and put his rod in the rod holder and
kick back and relax.
He looked back out to the west and went, okay. That was it. That was the last trip he went on.
Wow.
That was the last fish he caught. Yeah. I can say it now without crying, but it was one of those really,
yeah, man,
really
I can imagine.
super
I can
emotional
absolutely
moments.
imagine.
And I'll always remember that trip. But just he taught more shit than Charles Barkley, and he was just that. I mean, he's just like, like I thought he was going to say something like really profound or something like that. He's like, man, I'm tired of kicking your ass. I was just like, okay, Dad. But it's true though. I mean, I finally just put my rod up. I'm like, every time I got ready to cast, he'd be like, there he is. I'm like, God dang it. Put my rod back in the rod holder, grab the net, be like sitting there like waiting on him because I didn't want him getting up, walking around the boat.
Sure.
You know, because he was real weak at that point and lost so much weight and everything. So I'm just like, just stay put, Dad. And we'll wrangle him up there. And he would just he'd keep them out there for a while and let them wear themselves out. Yeah. He didn't try to get them up to the boat, and he just sat there and just cranking them in.
Work smarter, not harder.
That's right. Yeah, that was his plan. That's for sure. But yeah, man, that's the fishing life of Darren Jones. You know,
wow.
that's that's where the passion comes from. And you know, it's you're
feral about it.
I am. I have to do it. It's not for a choice of. It's not a choice of. Oh, I want to go fast. I have to. After it's I have to. Not being on the coast is kind of hard. Not living there. You know, living inland here is difficult. But we're close enough. We can get there pretty quick. And but it's just some of those things. After a while, after a few days, I'm just like, like during bird season. Like when September rolls around, I'm just like, I've got to shoot my shotgun. I've got to get out and hunt. And that's just the way I'm wired. And I absolutely love it, and I like sharing it with people. I don't
clearly.
I tell people all the time, I am not an expert at this. I fish with some experts, and they're the same way. Like with Chris, he's like, oh yeah, man, no big, but that dude's a stick, and he's a good guy to learn from. I try to tell people what works for me. I'm not a what you ought to do person. I'm like, well, this is what's worked for me. Yeah. And try it. And I like to see new anglers and new hunters enjoy like one of the biggest things that really touched me when my daughter shot her first turkey. Oh yeah, I bet. And she looked at me, she goes, now I see why you love this so much. I get it. Yeah. And she's like, now I get it. And I was like, yes, I can die now. Yeah, I'm good.
That was a make or break moment.
Yeah, it was. And seeing my son, hunt and love to hunt and seeing how much joy he gets out of it. And he's a pretty rabid turkey hunter in his own right. And fishing and just enjoying seeing. I was like, I want to show you what I'm so jazzed about. This is what I love. It's like somebody show you something that, like, I don't care if it's woodworking. Like, hey man, look at this. And to you, like, yeah, that's kind of cool. But man, that guy put a lot of work into that, and that's his heart and soul. That's what he loves to do. So pay attention to it. That's what that person really loves.
Maybe you can even argue that the reason that you can't not do it is because it's actually intrinsically wired inside of your being in your blood.
It is. I mean, they didn't paint paintings on cave walls of people going shopping. They did it, hunting and fishing and killing stuff and eating it, because that was a big deal. That's how you stayed alive. And we're all wired like that. It's just, some of it's been beaten out of us, or we're not exposed to it, but conditioned out. Yeah. But lucky for me, I grew up in a coastal town with a dad that liked to fish, and here I am, 55 years later, almost, and still love to do it. And I'll do it till I can't, I'll do it till I can't. Yeah. And hopefully that's for a whole lot longer. I've got more years on the earth than I have left, so I plan on fishing as much as possible.
Which you should, man. We've flown through the hour and a half already. Is there anything that you want to have said?
No, not really. Just, I'm very grateful to the community, to the fishing community here in Texas, and the trout fishing community especially, and a lot of that, from the Speckled Truth guys, kind of being the magnet for a lot to people.
That's a good point, actually. The release over 20, stuff like that was something that should never have been done, or was never supposed to have been done. But when it was done, I mean, I feel like it brought so many people together. I was one of the first big people who was like, this is insane. Like, this is what we need. Yeah. And it's just kudos on that one, 100%.
They're just a magnet for like-minded people. And same with like CCA and some of the other organizations out there. it's just it's a great community. It's a great community to share information, talking about different tactics, and just we all love the same thing, and we want to see it, but make sure that we have it. And it's completely selfish. I want more big fish out there for me to catch.
You think I don't?
Yeah, everybody does.
And then there's the argument, well, I mean, if you were good, you could still catch him. It's like, yeah, sure, I guess.
Sure, I don't want to be good. I want to be lucky. Yeah. I'd rather be lucky and good any day.
That's what I wrote about in my story.
Yeah, I'm an enthusiast. I'm not a professional.
I'm not here to work that hard. I just want to hold that fish.
Yeah, I want to. I want to go out there and work for them. But again, the more of them we have out there to catch, the better off it is. And that's my big thing. I guess my big takeaway is I like to see people enjoying the resource. I like to see this community come together for certain things, and I'm just very grateful to the community that have supported me, that buy my products. That's a big deal. People are giving you their money because they like your stuff. That's
more so their trust. They're trusting that you can make sure their day on the water is either more efficient, either more fun, either, less things to worry about. Like there's a lot of things that kind of go into that, but instead of over just a little bit of cash.
Yeah. And there's fishermen, and then there's like big trout anglers, and there's fishermen, and then there's fly fishermen.
Fuck those guys.
They're the group. Yeah. You and your ex officio shirts, your fancy boats. Yeah. No,
with your hooded sweatshirts.
Yeah. I digress. But, it's that group within the group that I really like. And same with like turkey hunters, there's hunters and there's turkey hunters. Cause I know some guys that are hunters, and I know some guys that are turkey hunters, and like, man, you got a problem.
I guess it's the same thing for every niche, right? Duck, quail,
yeah,
dove.
Guys that are like, some of my friends that are just hardcore deer hunters, I don't get it. It's just like I don't get why you like to get up and go slog through the mud and get rained on and shoot a smelly ass duck with your smelly dog. I'm like, I just love it. I love watching my dog work. I'm sorry, but to each his own. Whatever your passion is, do it. But I'm grateful to the dealers that support me. Grateful to the people that buy my stuff. I'm just very, I don't want to sound all altruistic or anything, but it's. I really
It's all
am.
a community effort. I mean, like I said, I said before, it's like an Ouroboros. Everything feeds itself. So the way that I like to end these is two simple questions.
Okay.
The first question is looking back on the things that you've been able to do in this industry, or take the question however you want. Is there anything that you wish you would have done differently? Anything you wish maybe you would have done sooner? And I used to use the word regret when I asked this question, but I feel like that's a very wrong word to use, because I don't consider it regret. I think that these last two questions are more for people who are listening, who might want to follow in your footsteps or in footsteps similar. And it's like, man, maybe I should kind of take a little bit of advice from what this guy's saying. That's why I asked it to everybody.
I wish I had done it sooner. You said it. I wish I would have. And, life happens, kids happen, jobs change. It's always a money thing. How am I going to pay for this? You can get started. You can start on the smallest level possible. If you've got something like, like some guys that have these, developed fishing lures. Like, man, I want to make a lure. Well, make one.
Do it.
You don't have to, you don't have to be supplying Cabela's yet. You just make one and see if it works.
Get started.
Just get started. Get off your ass and get started. And it took me forever. It took me 40 some odd years to get off my ass.
I don't think that's right. I think it just took you a while to decide to do it. But I think you're not giving yourself enough credit there. I think from what I've garnered in this conversation, I do not think you're someone who procrastinates heavily. I think that you finally got the idea. You're like, all right, fuck it.
I don't know. Look at those leaves piled up outside. I procrastinate a lot of shit.
I ain't talking about I ain't talking about that.
Yeah, you go look at the yard. I procrastinate quite well.
But all jokes aside, like I'm saying, give yourself credit where credit is due. I feel like a lot of, like you mentioned with Chris over from Speckled Truths and stuff, like a lot of people tend to play this humble card. And I think being humble is important. But I also think that you shouldn't take away from the hard work that you've put in and also make yourself seem something that you're not. Because if you're someone who does it, then fucking own it.
Yeah. Own what you do. And the main thing is just I wish I would have started this years ago. And, there's certain things I look back, everybody looks back, and it's something we all do. It's human nature to look back and go, man, I wish I'd have done that better. I wish I wouldn't have sold that car, sold that house, or whatever. But it's one of those things. I don't have really. There are some regrets that I have for some personal things that I wish I would have done way different. And but that's how you learn as a human being. If you're a sane human being, you learn from it.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, like my mom's got a saying, she goes, well, I'm smarter now,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes you gotta, it's like with anything else, you gotta feel some pain,
Sometimes more than one.
for those of us like me that aren't very smart, they got a high pain tolerance. It's like, wow, that really hurt bad that time. Like, well,
Just
maybe,
try it one more time.
let me try that one more time. Yep, that stove's hot.
Still
Yep.
stung.
Yeah, I shouldn't probably touch that for the 14th time, but some of us don't learn. But yeah, that's to answer your question in full. Like, I wish I'd have started this sooner because I'd be further along.
Yeah.
It's like, man, I don't want to get out. Traffic's thick. Yeah, but if you get out, you'll be 5 miles, further down the road than you were right now. So just get out in it and try it, because sooner or later things are gonna open up, or you might find out like, yeah, you know what, this isn't what I want to do.
Yeah.
I've talked to a lot of younger fellows. Man, I want to get in the outdoor industry. I'm like,
Do you really want to get in the outdoor industry?
yeah, do you really want to get into the outdoor industry? Or I said, if you like to hunt and fish, then keep hunting and fishing as much as you can. If you have a job that allows you to go and where you make good money, or whether you not make good money at all, just be able to do what you love.
Yeah.
But the whole, oh man, I want to get in the outdoor industry. I'm like, well, you got to be careful of that, because I used to shoot a lot in my former job, and I love to shoot. I do. I enjoy shooting. And when I went to go work for a gun company, I shot for work, but I never shot for just pleasure after that. Just going out to the range, because I got so tired of doing it that I was just like, you know what, I don't want to do this with my free time right now. And that's just one of those things.
Yeah.
It's just, you have to be very careful. And remember, I've got a friend named Cody Rosner, and he's in the business. He represents a lot of different brands, and this is his job. And he goes, at the end of the day, it's a business, and you're here to make money. Whether if it's something you're passionate about, great. But at the end of the day, it's got to make money, or it's not a business, and it's just a hobby.
Yeah.
I said, and you got to be able to separate those things. Luckily, I love to fish, and I like, supporting this industry. But I'm not going to do anything that's not going to make money and be
For
successful.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's why there's a lot of projects out there. I'm like, man, that'd be really cool, but I can't invest the money in that.
Hold it off until something happens. Maybe it becomes economical.
Yeah, if it becomes economical, I'll do it. If not, it's a cool idea.
So a one-off or something.
Yeah, it's a one-off type thing. But yeah, it's it at the end of the day, it's a business, and it's a good business. It's a fun business, and there's some great people in this business.
The community is what I'm recently learning about more and more ever since I started this too.
I've met some phenomenally good people in this business, and I try not to focus on anything negative, because it's not healthy. And I really can't think of, there's a few personality conflicts I may have with somebody, because I don't quite think like they do, but they're not like, oh, I wouldn't do business with that guy. I really haven't run into very many people like that. It's a super small percentage, at least from my point of view. I'm sure, with everything, there's that.
Everything's anecdotal, but I see where you're coming from. And
there's
I also
that
agree.
element's there. But yeah, I love the business, and yeah, it's just, but at the end of the day, it's a job.
Yeah.
It's work.
Last question. Okay.
Yeah.
As if you're talking to the next generation, think your kids around the time they shot their first turkey, maybe like plus 3-4 years, like, when they're 14 to 15 around there, and maybe want to get in the industry. What is industry, or just be an outdoorsman through passion? What is a piece of advice you'd give them going into that?
Well, I think, the main thing is just keep doing what you love, and do it to the best of your ability. And a lot of guys think, well, I have to have a 24-foot shallow sport to go fishing. No, you don't. If you really want to go fishing, grab your rod and, drive somewhere, get out there and fish if you really like to do it. And I think that's a limiting factor some people put on themselves. I'm like, if you want to go do it, go do it. I said, but looking back, like we talked about earlier, from the limit going from 20 to 3 in my lifetime, I was like, you guys have to realize that it's not like this may be as good as it's ever been in your eyes, but just like the article wrote, Like if I wish you could have seen it, because if I could go and show anybody anything, I would want to go show them what it was like pre-freeze in the 80s.
Showing that picture that you showed me from Mike McBride.
Yeah. It was just huge trout. Oh, the one from Billy, you mean?
Sorry, yeah. I thought earlier you brought up Mike's story. We never got into it. I thought that we were going to talk about that trout.
Yeah. Well, that one was sent to me by my friend, and he
Try to describe it.
He got that from he took that picture. I think it was at Billy Sandiford's house, and it's like a 19-pound trout that's just gutted.
It's absurd how big that fish is.
Gutted. It was like 19 pounds. I'm like, what?
You should post that picture on your Instagram.
It's not mine to post.
You should ask for permission.
I might ask for permission, because
I think that's a really cool picture. That's history right there.
It is history. And I've seen some pictures from, Bruce Schuler, when he owned Getaway Adventures. He had a picture of him as a little boy in the 50s, standing next to a trout that a guy was holding that was as long as him, and he's like 3 or 4.
Yeah.
I mean, waist high type, just gigantic fish, and I don't know if we'll ever see those again.
I think there's a chance. One of the things I wanted to bring up before we ended it was, earlier you said something about not being for like sanctuaries and stuff like that. One of the questions I wanted to ask you is, and this can be completely argumentative if you wanted to be, would you be up for making South Bay a sanctuary?
No, and here's why.
Interesting.
Having worked for the federal government.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
You see where I'm going? They could screw up a rock fight.
Federal overreach, yeah.
Yeah. Literally, they could screw up a snowball fight. They're that incompetent.
Yeah.
And
I guess I hadn't thought of it that way.
I hate to have any kind of, and I am as patriotic as a human being as you'll ever run into.
I can tell.
And I don't want the government involved in anything like that, because, and I'm not taking anything away from Texas Parks and Wildlife. They have a thankless job, and they do a lot of good things. They do a lot of great things. When we start putting boundaries on stuff, we don't get it back.
Yeah. And I see, I had never really thought of it like that.
But in that same respect, and you can square me away on this, because I haven't fished South Bay in a couple of years. I hear that when they're popping those rockets off, they close it off.
They don't actually. You can actually get inside South Bay, and you can actually take the north, south, east. Oh, you can take the west side, go behind on the sand flat stuff that's like mostly, it was used to be like fly fishing water mostly. Now scooters can get back there, and actually watch from like not stupid close, but like man, like bro, when I was filming Madre Padres, I had been back there with a buddy of mine, and you could literally walk up to the facility. Yeah. Like I remember walking close enough to where the guards were like, yo, like this is before they fenced it off and everything. You could fly a drone over there. Like you could do a lot of things. Yeah. Like, and
that's ballsy.
But it was right when it started happening. Right. So we were like, this was like going into 2020, they had just sold it. And I was like, oh, well, I mean, like might as well. I mean, what are the odds I ever get to do that again? And so, yeah, like you used to be able to do that stuff, and now you can't. But no, for the most part, it's open. And the reason I brought it up, and the reason I thought about it, so before Skipper Ray passed, he had come on the podcast, and I'd asked him about what he had thought about like the Gayman's Bridge area, and those two inlets. Right? It was like, is it San Pedro, and then the other one, or is it San Martin? San Martin Lake, and then Gayman's that connects to
Bahia Grande.
Bingo. And we had talked about how like, what is the point of having Bahia Grande if all we do is you have people who, again, we mentioned when I first got here, just sit there with like jigging hooks and try to foul hook stuff or cast nets, keep those big fish and whatever, all because it's there, right? And so we talked a little bit about that, and that kind of graduated to South Bay, and he goes like, unpopular opinion, I would shut it down completely. And you started like extrapolate his argument, like 2 of the 3 fish that Butter Roland caught over 36 inches or right at 36 inches were from South Bay. Yeah. And a lot of big fish have been caught in South Bay. It's very obvious. It's an extremely fertile nursery. It's probably, I would even venture to say, since it's so close to the ocean, or at least as opposed to the past, it is probably the most nutrient-rich area where everything kind of convolutes. And it has a lot of the ability for the nursery fish to immediately access it, where, you know, they don't lose as much as, like, statistically speaking, to other forages or whatever. And that's kind of where it came from. It was like, if we had closed that off, made a second Bahia Grande, could that then impose more fish and less genetically diverse fish from hatchery programs? And I think this was before I ever actually had a conversation with Shane, but know about the efficacy of hatchery programs. That's why I asked. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
And I get it, and I'm with your train of thought on there as far as not overusing it and it getting beat up. You know, and I hear that they're fighting the thing right now about them wanting to flush wastewater from SpaceX into there, and I'm like, oh, man, I hope they don't screw up this, because South Bay is a special.
Yeah,
it's a special place.
It is.
I've caught some big fish. I've caught some good snook and good trout, reds, everything back there. And
black drum still school like that, which is beautiful to see. You don't see that often.
You don't see that often. Big schools of rays. I mean, I've seen some really cool stuff in South Bay that you don't really see anywhere else, you know, and down there. And I'm with you on your train of thought, but as far as making it a sanctuary, you know, I want people to be able to use it, but it's like, God dang, it's so hard to police it. Like if we all were on the same program,
then you wouldn't have to.
You'd have to be, and it's like, you know, how do you enforce something like that without just completely closing it off to somebody use it? And now we don't have. That's just one less piece of water for us to fish.
That would just become a memory.
Yeah. And it's just like, well, you know, I remember, you know, back in the day. I remember back in my day, we used to be able to fish it, and now we can't because the man came in and closed it down.
Actually, you know, in juxtaposition to that, I will talk a little bit, and I'm probably speaking out of turn, but man, whatever, I'm going to say it anyway. So one of the issues with like some of the permit stuff in Florida, anyways, so a lot of permit were getting killed by sharks in a very specific point. Literally point. And there was a big push towards, you know, protecting those permit. This is what I've heard from the grapevine. I haven't heard it directly, but I do think it serves as a good counter argument to what I just posed. That they, you know, protected this area. People stopped fishing it. People were all upset about it. And in their head, it was like, man, this is a nursery. We'll have more fish. We'll have less pressured fish, whatever. What ended up happening, and this is, you know, again, take it with like salt if you wanted to, whoever's listening. But what ended up happening was a lot of the permit then realized, hey, like, we are not getting bothered over here. And so the permit that would show up on the flats and stuff, not as many, and I don't know by how much percentage wise, but just it's been less. And you can kind of deduce that they've all moved over to where it now is protected. So people can't reach them. Now they're there, but people can't reach them. So it's like, it does serve as a really good counter argument for what I just posed.
It does. And it's just like, we've got to figure out, because they talked about doing that with the east side of Port Mansfield up like by Butchers and all that.
Really?
Years ago. Yeah. They were talking about making that a no motor area.
But no motor zones I kind of can understand, especially with how our wind's so predominantly south and blows hard and whatnot.
Just, you know, and I'm, you know, and I've got mixed emotions on that too. You know, there was a lot of push behind that. Like, you know, we need to go after the boat, you know, the boat manufacturers. And I'm like, oh, time out.
I also presented that argument. You know, and then I talked to guys like Brian Little, and I'm like, wait, I'm wrong about that too. Like, there is no perfect answer.
There's no perfect answer. It's like suing a gun company or suing, you know, it'd be like suing, you know, Snickers for making you fat. It's like, come on, dude. I mean, we all have to, if we can all just agree on how to act and the etiquette on the water, I think we'll, and just like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't crank up right here while I'm over the top of a bunch of turtle grass and carve out a big thing, you know. And the reason that didn't happen back in the old days is because we didn't have boats that would do that.
Get in that area.
Yeah,
you had to walk over
we had to drift out, or you just, you know, put enough prop in the water to just scoot you out a little bit. But, you know, it's, man, that's such a hard one to, because you can see the benefit of it.
But then you really see like issues with it.
And then you see like, well, if I do that, then I'm not going to have a place to fish.
Enjoy.
Yeah. And that's, you know, I want everybody to be able to enjoy what I got to enjoy, because we had complete freedom.
Absolutely.
I mean, complete and total freedom to do whatever we wanted.
Just want to clarify, back in your day, right?
Yeah, back in my day. But it's, you that's a hard one, and it's that's not an easy answer, and I think we could talk for hours on that subject.
But I think it's important to have those kind of think tank discussions.
It is very much so, and that might be a really good podcast for you to do, where you get 3 or 4 different people on here that have alternating views, and we can have a civil.
You see those 2 more other that's like another, like, I don't know, like,
that's another project.
There's $900 right there. Yeah, I've thought about it. Trust me, I've thought about it.
Yeah.
It's just, but I want to do individual stories first. I think that's what gets me going, is knowing your story, knowing your peer's story, and understanding that these are so many stories that we all share in one same area. One thing that kind of makes it worthwhile. Makes the effort worthwhile.
Right.
That's why I kind of did this. That's why I've been doing this. I could have stopped a long time ago.
I appreciate it, man. It's been a lot of fun, and just telling the story about the company and it kind of a little bit behind me and why it all came together. I appreciate it, and I've been listening to it. Brian Little at Sabine, which I absolutely love those boats. That new Sneak. Pretty badass.
I got to see it when he built the first one. We were at the duck hunt. We were doing a duck hunt over at Fort Ellen, the Brazos, which is Clay Guest property. And man, that thing was cool. I got some videos of that thing, and the way he would just drive it onto the shore. Man, it was just funny. Brian's a cool guy.
I love it. Aluminum. So you just stick that sucker wherever you got it. And I saw the Smokey and the Bandit boat. The carbon fiber one that they did.
I want that. I mean, I'm not. Nothing is official yet, but I'm thinking it's going to be a switch in the next 2 years.
That's a cool boat. And he's, again, that's another guy that's like really smart and was
Absolutely.
like, I got to figure out how to do it and do it well. And put him, he's got his slice of the market. And I don't know anybody that owns one of those boats that doesn't like it.
I agree. I've actually never met anyone who says they don't like it.
Yeah. I mean, everybody I know that's got a Sabine. I got to fish on one. A buddy of mine actually works there now, but at Sabine. But I got to fish with the guys from Turtle Box. They've got.
I was just there yesterday.
Yeah, Will
Bradley.
Yeah,
Will Bradley's the one who bought it.
I was fishing with Will and Reagan on their boat. I was like, man, this boat is cool. That is a cool boat. It's a cool boat. So yeah. But anyway, I could talk for hours on stuff like that.
Man, we have gone a lot longer than I thought we were. Well, no, I knew after you and I met at the Houston Fishing Show, figured you were someone who was very verbose and could actually talk.
Yeah.
That's why I was so excited to get this done sooner, because I just wanted to get it, wanted to do it. And you clearly did. I mean, we're almost at 2 hours, an hour 57. So, I mean, I feel like that's a great way to end it, great place to end it. Again, with that being said, if there's anything else you want to say, and if not, we're good to go.
No, man, we're good to go. That's 2 hours of me running my mouth. I think that's all people want to listen to, but I do appreciate the opportunity. It's been a lot of fun, and be able to tell the story.
And hopefully we can probably work on some projects in the future. I think that would be very, very cool.
Absolutely. We need to go fishing.
That'd be cool too. I get my boat back next week. I'll finally be down there in a couple of weeks, maybe a month or whatever, but that'd be something I'd be completely open to do.
Yeah, man.
With that being said, I mean, I feel like there's nothing else to do but get on out of here. So we're good.
I appreciate you, man.
Yep.